Returnal from Housemarque is one of my most beloved video games of the 2020s, and honestly, it's probably one of my favorites of all time. Its brutal but satisfying difficulty, mysterious cryptic story, and tight rewarding gameplay made for an experience I have not been able to stop thinking about in the 5 years since. So as you can imagine, I was quite excited for Sorrowos, its pseudo-sequel follow-up that released earlier this year. And while I certainly enjoyed my time with this new entry and think it is a fantastic game, I would be lying if I said I enjoyed it as much as Returnal. In the weeks since finishing Saros, I've been reflecting on it a lot, trying to pinpoint what exactly left it feeling less impactful for me. After all, nearly everything about Saros is a direct response to Returnal. Everywhere you look throughout your journey, you will see refinements being made to elements that weren't quite perfect in the first game, or full-on fixes to common criticisms Returnal players had. There is no tangible reason why Saros shouldn't be seen as a clear-cut improvement, and yet I was not left with that impression. As I racked my brain for an explanation on why what should have been a guaranteed personal Game of the Year contender left me feeling slightly unfulfilled, it finally hit me. As crazy as it may sound, I think the difference between Returnal and Saros comes down to one single letter. Returnal stars Celine, pilot for Astra Corporation, a space exploration and research company. While out on a mission, Celine goes against orders and travels to a dangerous planet known as Atropos in search of a mysterious signal that calls to her. However, on the way there, her ship crashes and she is now all alone, with no way to contact Astra. Within minutes of exploring this planet, Celine is attacked by enemies, and I really want to pinpoint these first few combat encounters. They aren't super difficult or anything, as the creatures die fairly quickly, but they aren't exactly free kills either. They are aggressive and quick, able to take the space between them and the player at any moment. They shoot projectiles that can trip you up as you are still trying to learn the controls. Often attacking in large groups, these first encounters can feel quite overwhelming, a feeling that anyone playing this game will quickly get used to. These first groups of enemies are more than just tutorial filler. They are a sign to Celine that she is not welcome on this planet, and an indication that she is outmatched, both in strength and in numbers. Celine is perfectly capable, especially as the game progresses and you unlock more abilities, but she's definitely not some untouchable action hero storming through swarms of enemies like it's nothing. She is at the will of this planet's creatures, and that only becomes more apparent as you reach the boss fights. Each boss is a huge, towering figure, shooting a never-ending barrage of projectiles that always keep you on your toes. And with the only way to avoid these projectiles being jumping or dodging out of the way, you often find yourself spending multiple seconds prioritizing survival over dealing damage. So why am I detailing all of this? Well, that's because it all represents the key aspect of Returnal that really stuck with me. You truly feel like you are being hunted in this game, especially at the beginning. Celine is an outsider in a strange world where everything seems hell-bent on killing her for no apparent reason other than that's what they do, and she just so happens to be today's prey. It makes the world around you feel so dangerous, and this is elevated by Returnal's notorious difficulty. Returnal is seriously tough, and a big reason for that is because it is legitimately a get-good game in the truest sense. Yes, there are guns or items that can make runs easier, but finding those is RNG dependent, and even if you do get lucky, there is nothing that can fully protect you from the dangers ahead. I think about the Souls series, for example, the most popular games out there known for their difficulty, and yet even those have mechanics in place to make things easier. Whether that be through over-leveling your character or by using summons, the Souls games can kind of become as easy or as hard as you want them to be at a certain point. But Returnal does not have any of that. You really do just have to learn the patterns and get good. And ironically, I think this is both Returnal's best and worst aspect at the same time. On the one hand, you could argue this is legitimately bad game design because Returnal was heavily marketed as a roguelite game, yet there are basically no traditional roguelite trappings anywhere to be found. There is barely any permanent progression between runs, with most deaths leaving you with next to nothing. You might might get a new item unlocked that you may or may not ever see again, or maybe a new gun is added to the item pool, but that's about it. There is also only one permanent checkpoint at the halfway mark of the game. In other words, Returnal, which is a roguelite, does not feature the one key element to the roguelite genre. Every great roguelite has the ability to make you feel rewarded and like you're progressing even when you die. It is integral to the entire concept, and yet Returnal chose to ignore it. This is an undeniable flaw of the game, but it's also the very thing that made it so incredibly special. Overcoming Returnal is one of my fondest gaming memories. I so vividly remember the soul-crushing deaths that would erase 2 hours of gameplay with nothing to show for it. I can picture all the times I would close the game in anger and stare at the icon on the PlayStation home screen, swearing to myself I had given it my last shot, only to load up another run a few minutes later. Even more so than that, I remember the successes. Defeating bosses that felt impossible on my first few attempts, or finally reaching the mid-game checkpoint where I got some semblance of permanent progress, were euphoric moments. And more than anything, I remember feeling myself getting better at the game, scratching and clawing my way through by learning patterns, mastering the movement, or finding particularly effective combinations of items and weapons. That's why finally making it all the way and completing Returnal is one of my most deeply rewarding gaming experiences. Not just because I had beaten a game that was hard, but because I felt like I really earned it. As I continued playing to go for the true ending and clean up trophies, I noticed something interesting. By the time I beat Returnal, I had gotten so good at the game out of pure necessity that going back to these previous areas felt like a breeze. These same enemies that were so terrifying on my first playthrough may as well have been traffic cones. The bosses I spent multiple hours bashing my head against were dropping like flies. It was then I realized that with my improved skills, Celine was no longer being hunted. She was now the hunter. She had overcome Atropos, and in doing so, it had become far less threatening. That internal feeling is truly unlike anything else I've gotten from a game before. In the time since, I've realized that feeling was Returnal's progression. Not unlocks or upgrades, but my own personal skills improving with each passing run. I still do think that's a blatant failure in regards to its roguelite specification, and I wouldn't blame anyone for saying that's not acceptable. But I also can't deny it made for one of the most impactful first playthroughs of any game I've ever played. And I have no doubt being able to reach the top of that mountain is why Returnal has stuck in my mind for all these years, which is also why my somewhat lukewarm reaction to Sorrowos starts to make a bit more sense. In Sorrowos, you play as a new character named Arjun, an enforcer working for the Soltari Corporation. Playing the role of the classic evil megacorp, Soltari has discovered a valuable mineral called leucinite is present on the planet of Carcosa. Hoping to gather and control it, Soltari sends in groups to establish mining colonies. But when connection with these groups is lost, an emergency response team known as Echelon 4 must go and investigate. As part of Echelon 4, Argent enters the dangers of Carcosa, hoping to find these lost crew members, while also progressing personal goals of his own. This is a very different start to our story, and that distinction is extremely important. Arjun is not here by accident or by coincidence. He is a trained soldier, sent in to complete a job and get out. You feel that in the way the game plays out, not only with its story, but with its gameplay. Because while Saros features many similarities to Returnal, it also has a ton of very key differences. The major differentiator between Arjun and Celine is Arjun's shield ability. In Saros, there are multiple different types of projectile orbs that get shot at you. When you see a blue one, that is your cue to open up your shield and suck them up. This charges your alt fire ability, a powerful special attack. At first I just thought, okay cool, that's an interesting way to switch up gameplay from Returnal, but as I played with it more and more, I realized that this shield totally alters the feelings I associate with each game. Remember how I said Returnal always kept you on your toes, having to duck and weave out of all the projectiles headed your way? Well, Arjun's shield means that is not always the case. face. Sometimes your best bet is to go at these projectiles head on. And that one little difference completely changes Arjun's status in this world, and it changes your mentality as a player. You don't feel as vulnerable or as outmatched. Saros is still tough, of course, but it never seems as threatening, even during difficult boss fights, because you know there is always the option to stand your ground and take on certain projectiles. Runs in Saros are also significantly shorter. An average run-through of Returnal's first or second half could easily reach upwards of 2 hours, depending on how thoroughly you were exploring. But in Saros, you are rarely going to be reaching much more than 30 or 45 minutes, even when going for everything. This is probably better from a gameplay perspective, and certainly far less frustrating, but again, it changes the vibes of the game. In Returnal, it felt like you were constantly hanging on by a thread, desperately trying to survive. In Saros, it seems like runs end before they've even fully gotten started. Another difference from Returnal comes in the form of progression. After each run of Saros, you can head to the upgrade screen and use the resources you've gathered to grow stronger. A change that I would once again say was a necessity, as it makes death far less punishing and allows the game to get easier for those who need it, but it also takes away from that get good mentality of Returnal. And since Saros is obviously designed with this in mind, you are supposed to go through these locales multiple times to gather resources and upgrade your character. All of this makes Arjun's journey through Carcosa a much more controlled experience. It feels like Arjun is choosing to go out on these expeditions, to collect resources or learn more information before coming back to his hideout. As the player, you enter a level, blast through enemies for 30 minutes, and then return home to become stronger. All of these factors are why, to me, Arjun feels like the hunter in his story, not the hunted. And while there's not necessarily anything inherently wrong with that, I've played a lot of video games with a character who feels that way. I have played very few, however, that made me feel the way Returnal did. So while Saros is still a great game with fantastic combat and fun gameplay, I'm not left with that same impact. I've spent half a decade thinking about its predecessor, while Saros has largely left my mind barely a month later. I hate to say that because it sounds harsh, almost like I didn't enjoy the game, which again is not the case, but this hunted versus hunter swap definitely did alter my level of engagement and post-game feelings. All in all, I think the factors I'm describing with Saros could legitimately be used as a lesson in game design, a representation of how every single decision you make matters and can affect the final product. Giving a character a new moveset or ability isn't always as simple as, this would be cool. In the case of Arjun's shield, it can potentially change the entire trajectory of how the game is perceived by players such as myself. I do wonder how Saros will age in comparison to Returnal. Maybe I will feel differently as time passes, but for now, I cannot say it was better than its predecessor, even if nearly everything is an on-paper upgrade. I wish I felt differently, because my hype for Saros was incredibly high, but unfortunately, that's where things landed for me. I would be curious to hear how those of you out there feel. Am I totally off base here? Have you had a different reaction? Or is there just that special something missing in Saros? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.